SureSync is designed to transfer your files at the maximum rate that your equipment and environment can support. That may be faster than you really want. Throttling and tuning will allow you to maximize your data transfer rates and to also throttle them back so that you do not overwhelm your network connection to a remote site or overwhelm the hard drives on your servers. Throttling can be set on individual jobs via the priority setting. It can be set on outbound connections, and it can be set on each machine to provide a total overall limit that that machine will handle. Each communication must meet the criteria set in all of these categories, so the more restrictive setting takes precedence. On a job, you specify a priority for that job. The priority setting has a maximum transmit rate associated with it, or a maximum dynamic network load specification. You can also control the number of threads, which is really controlling the number of simultaneous file copies that may occur for that particular job. Let's look at how you might set throttling for a specific job. You can go up and select the options, and the normal default here has no restrictions placed on that particular job. It will try and use the entire network speed. It has no limits on how fast you can transfer data, and the data burst size, you would normally leave that as 0, which will let the system compute the optimum data transfer size. And the number of worker threads, which will control kind of the number of file copies that will occur at one time. If you leave that as 0, it's going to compute a default, generally based on the number of processors that you have available. The system does look at the network load and scale that back automatically. Alright, if we look at some of the other options that I have selected here, if we set one that I've named 10 megabits per second, we've set a maximum data rate here of 10, and that will make sure that this job does not transfer on any of the connections that it uses at a rate faster than 10 megabits per second. If we select 50% of net, we're looking at using the dynamic network load value here. And what this is trying to do is use no more than 50% of the available bandwidth on the connections that the job is using. Now, this isn't going to be terribly precise because activity changes quickly on a network. So it's going to constantly go up and down, but the system will do its best to try and limit how much load it's putting on that network, so that if you have other priority transmissions, they are likely to get through. And finally, we have one that's an example of limiting the number of threads. Here we haven't set any throttling on the network loads, but down here we've said limit yourself to only 2 threads, meaning really 2 copies that could be active at one time. We've found this useful in a couple of cases, such as copying to external hard drives, which may be terribly slow, and the seek times when you have a lot of simultaneous copies can actually slow things down a bit. So using fewer threads can often improve the overall performance of a drive like that. Let's look where we apply the priority settings. So here I've got a monitor set up. Within the monitor we have monitor intervals. If you edit the interval, it has a priority setting, and here you can select one of those priorities that you've defined, and that would restrict this particular job to the throttling that was set for that job. If you have a schedule, it has a similar setting on the schedule. Let's look at the other places where you can set throttling. If we go up to your computers here, we have the various computers, and we can say that the L1 server, we can go to its throttling setting, and here we can set the same rates that we have in our options. We can have a maximum data rate. If we set that to 10, it's going to limit us to 10 megabits per second. You can also set the dynamic network load. Usually you wouldn't set both, but it will end up using the lower of what the two values would compute. In addition to the network throttling, you can set the maximum number of file copies that should be active on this particular machine. So that's whether it's a source or a destination. And you can specify the maximum disk busy time. So the default is going to allow it to keep the hard drives as busy as they will handle, or you may throttle that back. At 100% rate, if you have a very heavy load because you've got fast machines and fast transmissions, you can make the hard drive so busy that it's difficult to get anything else done on that particular machine. The compressed transmissions is going to say any transmission to this particular machine should be compressed. You don't want to do that on local connections because it will actually make the communications slower than they would otherwise be. You can be even more specific with your throttling if you throttle an outbound connection. So let's go down to our R1 machine here, and here we've configured an outbound connection. On outbound connections, you can set throttling parameters that reflect how that communication link should be used, and this affects only transmissions occurring on that particular connection. So when R1 is communicating to L2 in this case, it will use this. But if it's communicating with any other machine, it will not use these parameters. So you can be very specific in where this throttling setting is used. Again, you also have a compress option here, which will compress transmissions that are being sent on this particular connection. Timeout would be used if advised generally by us because you're having problems with slow connections and a high error rate. Compression can also be specified on an individual job. We have a checkbox here, and if you set that, it affects this particular job that is within our case a monitor, but it could be within a schedule as well. When you're replacing a file on a destination, the system will automatically try to use delta processing. If we look at the rule on the Options tab, it has some options related to delta processing. You would normally not change these values. The system automatically determines when it's beneficial to use delta processing. It will only use it on a remote destination where there is a significant amount of latency, because there is some overhead associated with actually doing delta processing. Files have to be a certain size as well. There are a couple of cases where you want to force delta processing to occur. That can either be set here or back on our rule in the Performance tab. There's also an option to allow the use of delta processing on non-local drives. So if you have an agent that's in a remote location and it has a UNC path to another server, you could still use delta processing to transmit to that machine using the agent, and that's going to be more efficient to read the local UNC path from the perspective of that agent than using a non-delta method of transmitting. All transmissions by default are encrypted. There are different encryption algorithms that we use. Some are more efficient than others. In our configuration and status connection, We default to basic 256. Now this increases transmission sizes by about 30%, but that's not significant on this particular connection because very little data is actually transferred. On our data connection, we use a TLS, which is a transport level security, kind of like SSL, and that is a much faster means of transmitting because it's the amount of data that's actually put on the wire is less than with the other algorithms. The algorithms, by the way, are all FIPS certified, so they're available for government use. There is one option here that's no encryption. If you're using a VPN or some connection that is already encrypted, you can turn off encryption on that connection entirely. Now again, I would recommend that you only make changes to the encryption setting on your data connection. Leave the configuration one alone because that allows us to transmit configuration changes such as changing the data connection without having to go out to that remote machine and reconfiguring it. Please watch the other videos on communications for additional information.